Hi, and welcome back to Mustard Seed Hope, where we talk about near-death experiences, heaven, and the afterlife. Welcome to the channel, and thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please feel free to do it, as it does help us get these incredible stories out to even more people. So I'm excited to introduce my guest today. I have with me Mr. Bruce Van Natta, a near-death experiencer and also best-selling author. And I'm so excited to hear all about his experience. Hi, Bruce. Thank you so much for being here and talking to me.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me on, Miranda.
So, Bruce, I know you had a profound experience a while ago after you had a horrific accident involving a semi truck. Do you want to start on that day or do you want to go back a little bit further?
Oh, we can start right on the day if you'd like.
Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I live here in central Wisconsin. I owned a business where I traveled around. I did on-site diesel repair. And that day I was an hour south of our home. It was a 3-day job, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The last day of the job was Thursday. I was working on a Peterbilt logging truck, and I was called into the job because it had a coolant leak, antifreeze leak. I was working with another mechanic technician who worked at that facility, and I was just called in to do the technical part of the engine job. So at the end of the job, almost done, we started the truck. I told the other guy to jump in the truck, start it up just to test the repair to make sure it's no longer leaking. And so while the truck is running up to temperature, I'm putting my tools away. His name was Leonard. Leonard comes up, taps me on the shoulder. I remember just a few tools left to put away. And he said, "Hey, before you go, would you take a look at one more thing?" And I left my house that day at 6 a.m., got on job site about 7 a.m. And I remember looking up at the clock when he asked me if I would look at one more thing. I remember looking up at the clock and it was 6:10 p.m. And I was just doing the quick math in my head and thinking it's going to be I'm already at over a 13-hour day. I typically work 12-hour days, so, worked a lot of hours anyway, but I was already like a 13-hour, going to be over 13 hours if I walked out right then. And I didn't really want to do anything else. So I'm kind of looking at the clock. He can kind of read my mind, and he's like, no, I don't want you to have to stay super late. He said, just diagnose this thing, this other thing is another leak. And he said, maybe we can order the parts, have you come back at a later time. He said, maybe we something simple. You can tell me what to do. And so for anybody that's never looked underneath one of these big semi trucks, this is as big of a semi truck, what they call class 8, as big as a semi truck as they get. So there's a front bumper on these trucks. And if you were to look underneath that front bumper, that little gap, if you look from the front to the back, what you'd see is the lowest thing to the ground is typically the front axle. And the reason why is because the front wheels that turn when you move your steering wheel, that axle just attaches and it goes from one side of the truck to the other. And it's just basically a big steel I-beam. On this truck, it carried 5 to 6 tons of weight, so 10 to 12,000 pounds of weight on the 2 front tires. That's not the weight of the truck, but that's just what was on the 2 front tires, empty, sitting there in the garage. Leonard had used a round bottle jack. He had placed it underneath the axle on the passenger side, jacked it up in order to remove the passenger side front wheel so that we could get access to the engine. I had done everything from the top. So when he asked me to look at it, I looked underneath and I saw that there was a jack holding up the axle. And typically the way you would want to do it, the safest way the correct way to do it is to jack it up, and then jacks are meant to be lifting devices only. You jack it up and then you would take the weight off the jack and put it on a jack stand or some kind of blocking or something like that. But that hadn't been done. It was just the weight was on the jack. I'd done the same thing myself many, many times. I looked underneath there. I mean, it's been on there for 3 days. It's been running for 15, 20 minutes. So I'm thinking I'm pretty safe. I didn't even really give it a second thought. I just looked and thought, okay. So there's a tool that mechanics use to go underneath vehicles called a creeper. And the thing with tools there is a big difference between cheap tools and quality professional grade tools. And this creeper was just a do-it-yourself, home, very cheap type of tool because it was a plastic hollow core with these little small wheels. And anytime you try to use a creeper like that and you try to roll across the floor, the cracks and the gravel and stuff stop it. And it's really, really aggravating. I remember looking at the creeper and thinking that I didn't want to get on it because it was going to aggravate me. It was his creeper. It wasn't mine because he had been going underneath the truck. He had just actually just come out from underneath the truck. And that's when he had seen this dirty spot on the front of the engine. So he wants me to go underneath the truck and diagnose what the dirty spot on the front of the engine is. So I look in the back of my truck and I look at my creeper. It's got great big wheels and it's a professional grade tool. And I was thinking, I want to just get my tool so I don't get upset by using this cheap piece of junk. But I was tired. I wanted to go home and eat, go to bed. And so I didn't take the time and I just got on his tool, his creeper, to go underneath the truck, which literally was a difference between when the truck fell on me. If I would have been on my creeper, I would have been sheared into 2 pieces because of the thickness of the creeper and a steel framework versus his plastic creeper that just collapsed to nothing when the truck fell on me. So I look underneath the truck and I get on his creeper and I slipped underneath there, feet first, if you can picture that. And so I'm now laying underneath the truck, looking at the bottom. The running part of the engine is directly above me, and the axle that's held up by the jack on the passenger side and the wheel on the driver's side is basically above my belly button between the bottom of my ribs and my pelvic. So I'm just looking at the bottom because I'm positioning myself to look for this leak. And so I'm looking at it and I figured out what I thought it was. And so I yelled out to him and I said he could shut it off. I didn't need the truck running anymore. So when he got in the truck to shut it off, this type of truck has air suspension, big airbags, and so the truck shifted. As he got in the truck just kind of shifted above me, which is normal. It's common. But when it did, there was movement in the peripheral vision of my left eye, and I turned my head just in time to see the jack that was holding up that axle had slipped out. And when the jack slipped out, it was rocking. And I looked over and there's this crazy rocking, and I could see the jack just barely hanging on the axle. And before I could do anything, the jack shot out, and this 10 to 12,000 pounds of steel fell to the cement, and my body wasn't going to stop it. So if you can picture, 5 to 6 tons of steel dropping, and over on my left-hand side is where it hit, because the driver's side, the wheel was still on. So it hit on the passenger side. So if you can picture that, it was this loud, super loud explosion noise of the steel on the cement. But the weird thing for me is I heard like swirling liquid, and turns out the swirling liquid was from inside my body, because when the truck fell through the middle of my body on impact, not later, but right when it fell through me, blood shot out of my mouth and went on the cement. And it was just, even before the pain hit, I knew in my mind that the truck had just fallen on me. And it was, again, this crazy loud noise and this huge, just trauma, this thing hit in the middle of my body, the blood shooting out. And at that point, I just called out to Jesus and I said, Lord, help me. And I remember, for whatever reason, I said it twice. I don't know why I said it twice, but I remember saying, Lord, help me, twice. And that's when I looked down and I could see that the axle had fallen all the way through. So later we found out from the doctors that I don't have a belly button anymore, but where I did have a belly button, straight through the middle of my back, is my L4, L5 vertebrae. And both of those vertebrae were cracked, spider cracked, it said. So I was just a little bit thinner than my spine in the middle of my body. And there was maybe an inch between the bottom of the axle, the cement on this side. That plastic creeper just collapsed to nothing. So there's maybe an inch or so on the left side, and maybe a couple inches between the bottom of the axle and the cement on the right side. So again, it's coming up at an angle. The driver's side is still up, but the passenger side is on the ground of the truck. Horrendous pain at this point. I can't even describe how bad the pain was. It was off the charts. And so I'm looking at this. Leonard got down out of the truck and he didn't even shut the engine off, because that's what he got in the truck to do, was shut the engine off, but then the jack slipped. So now he's looking at me from underneath the front bumper. So there's that little gap. And so he's looking at me and I'm looking at him. And sometimes when somebody sees something bad, they go into shock and just freeze. And that's exactly what he did. He just froze up, and his eyes are great big. And because he had jacked the truck up and not used safety equipment, he had a look of guilt, I guess, whatever, on his face. And I had known him since I was really young. He used to bring his own logging truck back in the day to my dad's shop when I was young, like 13, 14 years old. And we used to work on his logging truck. Now he's working for his son-in-law and daughter at their business. And, many, many years have gone by. So, but anyway, I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and he's just frozen. And I was saying, shut it off, shut it off, shut it off, because it hurt so bad. And it seemed like forever, but he finally shook out of it. He shuts the truck off, and, I'm begging him to call 911, and I can hear him yelling. He does call 911. This logging business was in a remote area, as you expect a logging business to be. And so it's a volunteer fire department, and I know that. And he's on the phone, and I remember he said something along the lines of, a truck fell on a guy and he's crushed in half. And so he gets off the phone, he goes and gets the jack, and now he's going to try and, because he knows it's volunteer fire department, it's going to be a while before they get there. He goes and gets the jack, and he's going to try and figure out how to get the truck up off of my body. And so he couldn't put the jack back underneath the axle because the axle's on the ground. So he's looking for a spot, and the only place he could find was the suspension of the truck, the front leaf spring that's connected to that axle. So side view, kind of like this big curved leaf spring like this. So he puts the jack underneath the front arch of that leaf spring where I could look to my left. But the problem is, you don't want to ever jack something up on a curve or an arch, because the jack is just going to slip. And I was begging him not to jack it up there because I was afraid the jack was going to slip. And he's saying to me, I don't have a choice. It's the only spot. And so as he's jacking the handle, I can watch the jack slipping, but then it caught on the edge of a little U-clamp bracket for the end of the short leaves. And so now the truck starts going up, but I can see all that weight is just barely on like the corner edge of that top part of the jack. So he's jacking it up, one pump at a time, and it's going up and up. And so now when he got the truck off of my body and I looked down, so I had my work uniform, Bruce's Mobile Service, a couple patches here, whatever, but right at the bottom edge of my ribs, my work uniform went straight back, basically followed along my spine and came back up at my pelvic. And when I saw that, there's nothing in real life to compare it to. It's, the word they say, surreal. I don't know, nothing to compare it to. So I'm looking at it, and the only thing, not in real life, but the only thing I had to compare it to was it looked cartoonish to me. And that's all I could think of, is like, it looks like a cartoon. And I remember being, a little kid and watching Wile E. Coyote get run over by the Acme truck and have the flat spot. And that's what it looked like. It's just this ridiculous cartoonish flat spot across the middle of my body. So the other thing, besides the shock of seeing my body with the flat spot, the other thing was, found out later from doctors that I had 5 places, major arteries were completely severed. And because of that, as soon as he took the jack up off my body, or jacked up the truck off my body, all those spots that the arteries were severed were able to bleed out. So I began to immediately internally bleed out. And when that happened, again, as long as the axle was on me, I had everything pinched off. But as soon as he jacked it up to get it off my body, I felt this incredible weakness. So I had a horrible pain. But as soon as he took the truck off of my body, this weakness took over. And I don't even know how to describe it, but just like a shorted out battery, just like complete weakness. And they said that's because all the blood was now pumping into my body, into my stomach cavity or whatever. So I'm afraid the jack is going to slip. I'm afraid it's going to fall on me again. I'm panicking. And so I was yelling out to him and just pull me out, drag me out, because I'm still on the creeper, and the creeper's flat in the middle, but the wheels are still, on and connected and everything. And I was begging him to pull me out from the truck. And most people have been told that you don't want to move somebody with a back injury. And so he could see I obviously must have some back injury because I got a flat spot across my body. So he's saying no. He's called 911. He's not going to touch me. I'm panicking. I'm in shock. And one of the things about in shock is your heart rate super elevates, your pulse is pounding, which exaggerates the problem if you have an artery leak. So it's really just pumping out like crazy now in my abdomen. And I was so afraid that the truck was going to fall on me again that I reached back and I grabbed the bottom of the bumper, which is just back behind my head, just back. I was just underneath the front of this truck. And I grabbed that bumper and I dragged myself out. It took everything I had because the creeper is flat in the middle, but I dragged myself out and I looked underneath and I could see that if the jack slips now, that the axle is going to fall on my legs. And so I thought if I could just put my palms on the bumper and just straighten out my arms and do one last push, then if the jack slipped again, it would miss my legs. And so that's what I tried to do. And as I was trying to do that, 2 things, for whatever reason, I fixated on my right arm, and my right arm was, the bicep was, my whole body was shaking, but especially my arm was just shaking. It was shaking so bad, it was like in a blur. Like it was just shaking like that as I was trying to push. And it really scared me when I was looking at my arm shake like that. I'd never seen it do that before. And it was shaking so bad. But the crazy thing was, I also at this point realized, we found out later, the bottom of both my lungs were collapsed because of the trauma. And so because the bottom of my lungs were collapsed, I was having a hard time breathing. And so I'm looking at my arm shaking, and that's right when I realized that I couldn't breathe. I was trying to suck in it seemed like I could suck in breath, but it just got harder, harder, harder from the point that the truck fell on me until this point. And now by this point, as I'm trying to do that last push just to get me out, I'm literally doing this, trying to suck in the next breath, and I couldn't. And my heart is racing. And sometimes, you know how when you're really active, you can hear your pulse like pounding in your ear. And so my heart is just racing, boop, 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 boop. And I'm trying to push and I can't. My arm is shaking. I'm trying to breathe and I can't. And my heart is racing. And then I just heard my heart. It's the weirdest thing. It was just like, it reminded me of, like, when I think about it, it's like shutting off an engine. Because as a mechanic, you shut off an engine, I literally hear it because I know what's inside the engine. It goes bup, 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 right to the last beat when it stops. And that's what my heart did, just like that, just racing, bup, 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 bup. And on the last, like seemingly the last beat of my heart, my spirit left my body and I went up the roof of the garage and had one of those people call near-death experience or out-of-body experience or whatever. But my spirit is up here. The first thing I noticed was this incredible peace that I, again, don't have words to describe. Peace that doesn't make sense, peace that's perfect, peace that, I don't know, just this amazing, amazing peace times 1,000, times 1,000,000. So I'm up in the roof and I say it like this, I was having a party by myself because it felt so good. Sometimes people are afraid of dying, or Christians afraid of dying. And I always tell somebody that's a Christian, we don't have anything to be afraid of when we die. I really think that when a Christian dies, it is going to be the best day of their life, really. And, sometimes people get mad when I say that, but it's because they didn't experience what I experienced. And I know what I felt. It felt amazing. And I didn't even get to heaven. I was just, 14, 15, 16 feet up on the roof of this garage. So I'm up here in perfect peace looking down from above, and I can see the accident scene. I can see Leonard. I can see the front of the truck. It's a conventional long nose, so the hood is now shut. Just this much of me, like, shoulders and arms, just the top half of my body sticking out from underneath the front. But I didn't know it was me. And I'm looking down at an angle, and I'm listening to Leonard. He's on his knees above me. He's running his fingers through my hair. He's crying and apologizing and saying he's sorry and stuff like that. But because I didn't know it was me, because I was in perfect peace, I didn't care. I was just up there, just observing, I guess is the best way to say it. So I'm observing from above, and I was really focused on him and what he was saying. It was like really like a tight focus, but then it was almost like in a movie when the camera pans out a little bit, and it was like that. Well, like my focus just panned out a little bit, and I realized that on each side of Leonard was an angel, and I didn't have to guess that they're angels. I just knew that I knew that they were. Leonard is like 6'1", 6'2", and he's on his knees, and these angels are also on their knees, one on each side, but they were, their heads were a couple feet taller than his, so I'm gonna guesstimate like an approximately 8 feet tall angels. They had white shining robes, and I've looked up how many times, every time angels are mentioned in the Bible now, and it's like 290 sometimes, and a handful of times it talks about their like countenance and like a white, like they're shining light, they're emanating light, and that's exactly what I would have described it as. They're emanating light. They had white robes with a belt. It was two men. They had really long hair. The long hair went almost down to where their belt was on their robe. They were very muscular, big, broad shoulders, very muscular, like narrow waist. They didn't have wings. They just looked like really big, like 8 feet tall, muscular guys in white shining robes with long hair. But they were matching bookends. I mean, they were identical. They looked identical side to side. And the one from the driver's side reaches over and he puts his hands in the middle of the flat spot. And one from the passenger side did the same thing. And from above, I looked down and saw them do that. And I just thought to myself, the angels are down there to help that guy. And oddly, it seemed very nonchalant, almost normal, which has puzzled me, or did puzzle me, for a long time. But I think the reason why I felt so normal or seemed normal is because angels apparently are very normal in the spirit realm. And because I was in the spirit realm, it just seemed normal. So they're touching me, which I didn't know it was me in the middle. And the volunteer fire department, are continue to show up, onesie, twosie, or whatever as they're coming. And because at this point I've got no pulse, no heartbeat, I've got a massive chest injury, they're not going to do CPR. So they just are they've called med flight. They're now just standing around respectfully, quietly talking. And Leonard is, above me crying, and they're just kind of all standing around, not doing anything because no heartbeat, no pulse, too late. And then the garage is shaped like a big rectangle, a shoebox, and everybody come in from behind me, like the main entrance, just like I had for the last couple of days. I actually backed my truck into that spot for 3 days in a row. So my truck is backed up to the front of that big logging truck, and my truck is nothing more than a big rolling toolbox with all my tools on it because I did remote, on-site repair. So as I'm looking down, everybody came in from the front of the garage, the main driveway, except for two people, the last two people to get there. And one of them was the only woman, red-haired lady named Shannon. I didn't know her, but found out later. And then a gray-haired guy. And he was the only gray-haired guy, and she was the only woman. But they came in this back door, all the way in the back corner of the shop. And so I'm just going to stop here and say, through all different injuries, I have spent more than a year in the hospital in my life. And it was over a year that when the accident happened in November of 06, and my last operation was in December of 07, major operation. I've had other ones since then, but like from the trauma and all that, my major operation was in 07. And so sometime in like January, February 08, I went to that volunteer fire department on their monthly meeting just to tell them thank you. And I called the chief and asked him if I could. He said yes. He kind of hid me in a room. They started their meeting. He brought me out, and there's like 30 people in the room. And I was able to go around that room like a little over a year later and point out 8 of the 10 people who had come to the scene of the accident over a year before. But you have to remember, no heartbeat or no pulse. And I'm telling, oh, you were there, you were there. And the two easy ones was a red-haired lady, because she was the only woman, right? And then the older guy. And I said to them in front of everybody, you guys came in the wrong door. Everybody else came in the front. And I thought about this for a year. How did you come in the wrong door? Why did you come in the back when everybody else came in the front? And because it had been like a year, they had to like think about it. They couldn't even like immediately remember. But it was just a simple reason. They had driven past, saw the flashing lights, missed the first driveway, caught the secondary little gravel driveway that came to the back of the shop, and came in that back door. And it's a little detail, but that little detail proves the real Bruce was in the ceiling watching, my spirit in the ceiling watching, telling them what doors it can. Because at that point, no heartbeat, no pulse for, I don't know. So at that point, no heartbeat, no pulse for a little bit, whatever it was, and she gets down between the angels. She's feeling for a pulse. The guy, there's a big guy in farmer bibs in the other corner, the pastor's front corner. And I remember he had his arms crossed and he was telling her it's too late. He's already passed. And she's ignoring him and she's feeling for a pulse. And he says it again, it's too late. And she just ignores him. And then she said, what's his name? And that's when, Leonard says, Bruce Van Natta. And this woman starts slapping that guy in the face down there and saying, Bruce Van Natta, come back, come back. So I'm watching it from above. The angels are still there on each side of her. And as she's slapping on the face saying, come back, my spirit started creeping down in the ceiling closer and closer and closer. I didn't know it was my name, but something about it seemed familiar. And all of a sudden my spirit came back into my body. And when it did, I went from feeling the best I've ever felt to feeling the worst I've ever felt. And I said, oh, 4-letter word that means fertilizer. I'm the guy that's underneath the truck. It's me. It hurts so bad. I don't want it. I don't want this. And I just made that declaration in my spirit, soul, whatever. I don't want this. And my heart stopped. My spirit left my body. I went back up to the roof of the garage, like that, right where I was before, 14, 15, 16 feet, whatever it was. Back to perfect peace, back to no pain, which is what I wanted. But this time, a tunnel opened up going out of the roof of the garage. And sometimes people who've had near death, or Christians a lot of times who've had near death or out of body experiences, talk about that tunnel. And it was like 1,000,000 miles long, but there's a bright light on the end of it. And I knew that I knew that I knew heaven was on the end of the tunnel and Jesus was there waiting. And so I got in the tunnel and I started going away towards the bright light, happy to go to heaven, happy to meet Jesus. I felt like I was like maybe halfway there. I don't know. And then all of a sudden I could hear this. She was saying, come back, come back. And I got sucked backwards out of the tunnel. I'm now looking from above and I could see the angels. I could see the lady. And my spirit comes back into my body the second time. And again, I go from feeling this perfect peace to this horrible pain. And it hurt so bad. And I looked on my left and my right with my earth eyes, and I couldn't see the angels anymore. And it really scared me because I really needed them. And I couldn't understand why God would take the angels away when I needed them so bad. And it hurt so bad. So I'm looking, I can't see the angels. And sometimes I mention it, sometimes I don't. But there was this loud voice that just kept yelling, just give up, just die, go to heaven. Just give up, just die, go to heaven. But then there was a still small whisper. And the first thing that struck me about that whisper, it was very calm. He definitely was not yelling. It was just a very calm voice and it just simply said this: if you want to live, you're going to have to fight, and it's going to be a hard fight. And then I got this other voice going, just give up, die, go to heaven. And I literally said, screw it. I don't want to fight. It hurts too bad. And when I made that choice, that decision again, my heart stopped. My spirit left my body. I went back over the roof of the garage. The tunnel opened back up. I got back in the tunnel and I started going towards heaven happily. And again, I was maybe like halfway there when I could hear this: Bruce trying to come back, come back. I got sucked backwards out of the tunnel the second time. I'm looking down from above. I could see the angels again that I just couldn't see with my earth eyes, but they're there. I could see them in the spirit. And I could see that lady, Shannon, above me. And my spirit comes back into my body. And when it came back into my body that third and final time, her face was like right here. And then she says to me, Mister, you're on the verge of life and death. What do you have to fight for? Do you have a wife? Do you have kids? Do you have anything in this world to fight? Because you need to fight. And I knew right there that God, the same whisper that it spoke to me that if I want to live, I was going to have to fight. It was going to be a hard fight. Somehow that same voice was coming out of her, but it was her voice. It was a female voice, but I knew that it was God speaking through her. And it wasn't retrospect. I knew it right there. And he reminded me through her of my wife and my 4 little kids at that time. And if it would have been up to me, I would have just left and been gone. But because I had 4 little kids and a wife, I stayed for them. And that was it. I just stayed for them. I wouldn't have stayed for me, but because it hurt too bad. And so she says, what do you have to fight for? Do you have a wife? Do you have kids? I think of Lori and the kids. And then she said, don't close your eyes. Stay here. Stay here and fight. Don't close your eyes. So it was kind of a long drawn out process, but they ended up calling an ambulance, which then took me to a little small hospital, like maybe half an hour away or 20 minutes away or whatever. I guess maybe half an hour away. I'm not sure, like roughly. And then the helicopter came there and picked me up from there and took me. And I was only at that little hospital for like 10 minutes or whatever, 15 minutes. Then they picked me up and then took me to our state's largest trauma center, where when I got there, a couple of night shift doctors worked on me. It's a 2.5-hour drive from where we live here to that hospital. And so somebody called my wife and said, your husband's in a bad accident, you need to come down. So my wife and my mom and some other people got together and drove the 2.5 hours down to the hospital. And the doctor had, the head of the trauma department had gone home for the night, but then he got called in to take over my operation, and he finished the initial operation, and he came out and he told my wife something along the lines of, in all of his years of running the trauma department, he had never seen a body so badly traumatized and the person make it to the hospital. And his comment was, your husband must have one hell of a will to fight. But he said, I don't expect him to live through the hour. All we could do is hook back up the arteries. There's so much more damage that needs to get fixed, but he can't tolerate it. His body won't be able to tolerate it. And so they just hooked up the arteries, whatever they did with that, and were putting blood in me, and just left it at that, and said they didn't expect. He said I wasn't gonna probably live through the hour. So one of the people from the church heard the doctor say that he didn't expect to live through the hour. So that guy Jim, he said to everybody, hey, if the doctor's saying he's not gonna live through the hour, let's give God thanks for every half an hour that he's alive. And I don't know what made him say that or think that, but so every half of an hour they got in a circle, held hands, and said, God, thank you for a half an hour more of life for Bruce. And instead of dying an hour, every half an hour all night long, they kept praying that. And the next morning, the doctor came back from home, shocked to find that I was still alive. He figured I would have died already. And my wife said, are you going to go back in and start those other operations? He said, no, I don't think he can handle it. They waited like another 2, 3, 4 hours, something like that. Lori said she talked to him again and just told him, go ahead, we're going to be praying, you do it, and we'll just put him in God's hands. So they operated on and off all week long. They kept me in induced coma for quite a while. And when they did take me out of induced coma after however many weeks or whatever it was, I remember I still had the breathing tube in, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't talk. And I was trying to talk. And the first thing that I wanted to tell everybody was about these angels. I just wanted to tell them about these huge angels. And I couldn't talk, and I didn't know why. And then they're saying you can't talk, you got the tube. And I remember being really frustrated. And then I motioned for something to write with. So she gives me a pen or a pencil, and I was just going to write the word angel. That's all I wanted to write. And I couldn't make the stinking A come from my brain and out my fingers. It was so frustrating because I knew I just wanted to write the word angel, and I couldn't do it. It was like 6 months before I could read or write again. And in the hospital, I had to learn to walk again, and I had a lot of operations and all this stuff. But your small intestine is basically right underneath your belly button. So when the truck fell on me, it destroyed most of my small intestine. And at that time, they said that you needed approximately 100 centimeters of small intestine to be able to live. And so the doctor tried to come up with 100 centimeters of all the crushed intestine. And pathology report, I didn't even find this out, but somebody that was researching my case said the most convincing part about this miracle I'm about to say is the pathology report, because he removed all this intestine and sent it to pathology. And he saved 2 pieces that was a little over 100 centimeters, but one of those 2 pieces was pretty damaged, but it was least damage of all the damage. So he saved those 2 pieces, put them together. I had a tube out of me for months and all that before they hooked it all back up. I couldn't eat for months and months and months, but they're feeding me intravenously. I'm literally starving to death in the hospital. And it was, I don't know, however many months, maybe like 5 months, 4 months into it, that I'm literally dying in the hospital. I've gone from, like I said, I think I might have said I lost 65 pounds. I look like somebody out of a concentration camp. You can see my skull. You can see every bone in my body. And they're basically saying that I'm gonna starve to death, die like that, is what they're telling me. And so I remember getting a fight with one of the doctors and saying, let me go home. And they're like, I made them mad enough that's when they finally told me, you're never gonna go home. You're not gonna live. They had never told me up until I got nasty with the doctor and was arguing about leaving. So anyway, in the middle of all that, one of those pieces of intestine he saved died. And so they had to cut me wide open again, take out that piece of intestine that died. And now I'm underneath the 100 centimeters. It's looking really bleak. And it was during that time that God woke up this guy named Bruce, another Bruce like me, way over in the state of New York. And he woke him up 2 mornings in a row at 5 a.m. and told him, buy a plane ticket, fly to Wisconsin, and pray for me in the hospital. My old pastor at my church that right here in this town where we used to go, where my wife used to work, had taken a church over as a pastor out in New York. And this guy worked with him at that church. And so I was on their prayer chain because of the accident. They knew about it, and I was on the prayer chain. So he had heard, on a Sunday morning, they had already prayed for me. So he knew that this bad accident happened where the truck had fallen on me. So anyway, God wakes him up at 2 mornings in a row. And he told me later he didn't like to get up early. And the first morning he told his wife and he told his pastor, but he didn't do anything about it. And then the next day when God woke him up at 5 a.m. again and said, buy a plane ticket, fly to Wisconsin, pray for that guy, he did. And it ended up costing him like over $900 for that ticket to come short-term notice. And, clear back in 2006. So he flew to Wisconsin. Some people from my church took him to the Madison Trauma Center Hospital, a couple hours from here. The guy showed up in the room. He had borrowed a guitar. He sang a couple songs. He prayed what I would have called normal at first because he was talking to God. But then he switched gears, and in Mark 11, Jesus talks about speaking to the mountain, which is whatever the problem is, in the name of Jesus. So a lot of people or Christians are familiar with like praying to God, that kind of praying. I mean, that's what everybody knows about. But then there's this type of praying that Jesus talks about in Mark 11, where instead of speaking to him, we're talking to the problem in his name.
Yeah.
So this guy puts his palm on my forehead, points at my stomach, and says, "Small intestine, I command you to grow back right now in the name of Jesus." And when he did, it felt like I touched an electric fence. Like literally, I felt a shock come out of his palm into my forehead to the point that it like stung. Like I felt power went through me right to my stomach, and I could feel what felt like my intestines going around in circles. And I literally felt the miracle happen. And doctors knew how much I had for an intestine, and now when they look at the CAT scans, x-rays, and all the stuff, they say I've got approximately half of my intestines. So in other words, if they say you have 18 to 20 some feet length of small intestine, that means I've got 9 to 11 feet. Just I don't want to say guessing, but just theorize, looking at what I've got, because they say they can't measure small intestine, unless they were to take it out. And it's too circuitous was the word they used. It's basically a big ball of worms right below your belly button. So they can guesstimate. So they guesstimate I have approximately half my intestines based on the CAT scans, and they did dye tests and all the different stuff, the radiology tests. So they say I have half my intestines. So bottom line, I've got 9 to 11 feet. So God gave me back several feet of small intestine and a creative miracle. It's a difference between me dying 18 years ago and still being alive today. So God did mainly the two big miracles are doctors say I'm the only person they can find that's lived after having major arteries severed in 5 places. And then they say because this creative miracle where all these, several feet of intestine came out of nowhere. So these two huge miracles are the reason why I'm still alive. And I'm just, we ended up starting a nonprofit ministry, and I just go around and I share this testimony of what God did for me. And one of the biggest reasons why I share it is because I know that I'm the last person that I didn't deserve this at all. I did nothing to deserve this. I didn't, sometimes people get a mistaken thought or idea that maybe I was like this, great guy or, whatever. Like sometimes, it's kind of like the theology, you're thinking that like if something bad happened to a pastor or a priest or something like that got to do a miracle for him because they're like favored or special to him. I'm at the exact opposite end of the spectrum. And I think the reason why God saved me is to literally set the bar so low to say that, look, if he'd save somebody like me, then he'd save anybody. I mean, years and years of drug and alcohol abuse. I sold drugs for years. I did, lots of bad things. I self-medicated my own pain from a bad childhood, basically. And so again, I just want to tell people so that they can make their own choice. I'm a skeptic. I've been a skeptic my whole life. It's who I am. It's the way I think. And so I can understand when people are skeptic of even near-death experiences or God or anything, because that's the way I'm wired. And I think God has a sense of humor for this to even happen to me, because I'm the guy that would like, poo-poo that kind of stuff. So I just want to keep sharing this testimony so that people know, look, when we die, it is not the end of the story. When we die, there is something else. And all these near-death experiences that, I mean, all you got to do is Google near-death experience, and there's thousands of stories that comes up. Not just for Christians, for people that, were atheists that died and didn't believe in God and then experienced something. And those stories actually speak really loudly to me as a skeptic, because Christian dies, they were thinking that this was going to happen, but atheist dies and they said nothing, I don't believe this stuff, but then they experience something spiritual. To me, that's proof, because it's not their predominant thought. It wasn't what they were thinking when it happened. So for me, that's even more impactful. But either way, we've been going around sharing this testimony with people and, just letting people know God's alive and well. Jesus came on the cross to die for our sins, as well as our sicknesses, our diseases. Miracles are still happening in the name of Jesus. I mean, we've seen God do some amazing stuff in the last 18 years. And he never ceases to amaze me in what he does for people and the love that he pours out in people's life. I mean, and I'm not going to say that every person we pray for gets healed or every person's prayer get answered the way that we want it. No, not at all. But he does do enough stuff, what we pray for, when, the way we want it, that I know that's not a coincidence. It can only be miraculous. It's because of his love. And he hears prayer. I mean, sometimes he doesn't answer the way we want, but that doesn't mean he's not listening. He's listening. And so we just have to, it says pray to him, receive him, believe him. And so again, I think the biggest miracle that could ever happen was when somebody asked Jesus in their life to be their Lord and Savior, so that when they die, they get to spend eternity in heaven. Because it's not about being a good person. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get there or, be going there. It's about Jesus. And so that's what I want to tell people about. Again, it's been a really crazy 18 years. It was an ugly time in the hospital, and all the rehab after that, all that stuff. And there was a lot of negative, a lot of bad to it. But in the end, I can see where God has used this to help a lot of people, bless a lot of people. And I guess, in the Bible, it says that he'll make good come from bad. And I can see where he's made good come from bad in from this bad thing in my life. So
yeah, that's what I love so much about your story, is that I really think it gives so much hope. And your story is not just one miracle; it's like a culmination of multiple miracles that has led you to this place. And I think this has so much potential to touch so many people. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Bruce, if people want to find out more about your ministry, or if they want to find copies of your books, like how could they go about doing that?
they can just go to sweetbreadministries.com. That's our website, and they can go through and reach out to us there, or whatever. There's links to the books on Amazon. For every book that we personally sell when we do services and stuff, we give away into prisons and jails. So sometimes I read comments, people say, oh, it's about a money grab, he's trying to sell books. I've never even been reimbursed for the amount of money that it cost me to have the first book published, literally, because we gave all those books away. The $18,000 that the publisher made me up front, I sold my antique motorcycle to pay for that, for part of that. And so anyway, we gave all those books away. And when we go and do services, every time somebody buys one, it allows us to give one away for free. Obviously, when they buy it on Amazon, it's being bought from the publisher or whatever, then that doesn't apply. But yeah, it's definitely not about the money. It's not about trying to sell books. But when the person gets the book in their hand, they're blessed, because they're only going to listen to so long of a sermon or so long of a podcast. Whereas if they get the book, there's a lot more information, a lot more ways that God can minister to them through those books. So people say they're blessed when they read them.
That's perfect. So if you're interested, Sweet Bread Ministries. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Yep.
If you're watching and you have had a near-death experience yourself, or know of someone who has, and you're interested in sharing, you can feel free to send me an email at mustardseedhope2025@gmail.com, and I'll put that email in the video description, along with a link to Bruce's ministry webpage. Thanks again, Bruce.